The snow basin looked like a blank page that refused to hold ink. A six-person Recon element crested the last rise in a tight stagger, boots crunching on crusted powder, breath pulling pale ribbons into the air. The daylight was hard and unkind, the kind that flattened everything into glare and shadow and made distance lie. Ahead, the communications outpost sat like a forgotten tooth in a field of white, low cinderblock building, a sagging fence line, a stub of antenna that looked chewed off at the root. No smoke, no tracks that mattered, no movement, just wind scraping across frozen ground. Staff Sergeant Ward held his fist up. The team stopped with practiced economy. No talking, no wasted motion. He scanned with the calm of someone who'd learned what panic costs. Outpost in sight, the radio operator murmured, then cut himself off like he'd spoken too loud in church. The point man, Corporal Haskins, dropped to a knee and raised his optics. He swept the fence line slowly, then gave the all-clear signal with 2 fingers and a flat palm. Routine, scripted, but something about the snow near the fence made Ward's neck tighten. It was too smooth. The snowdrifts along the perimeter looked brushed, like someone had walked there and then erased their own footprints, leaving a tidy surface that didn't match the wind's messy handwriting elsewhere. It wasn't obvious at first glance. It was the kind of wrong you felt more than you saw, an absence where there should have been clutter. Ward's eyes flicked to the building. The door was closed. One window was cracked like spiderweb glass. He lifted his radio to his mouth. "Sunray, this is..." The handset coughed once. A single burst of static popped like a match head. Then nothing. Ward tried again. His thumb pressed hard enough to whiten his nail. The radio was powered. The display glowed. But the air swallowed every word. Not even a hiss returned. He looked at the radio operator. Switch frequency. The operator already had his fingers moving, flipping channels with the speed of a man who'd been burned before. He keyed up. "Sunray. Comm check." Static, like a sheet being torn. Then silence again. A suffocating, engineered silence. Ward didn't need anyone to say it. The timing was too clean. The radio had worked perfectly 5 minutes ago. It died the moment they stepped into the basin. "Jamming," the operator said, voice tight. Ward's gaze snapped to the ridges that boxed the basin. 2 rises flanked the approach like jaws. High ground. Long lines of sight. "Move," Ward whispered, and the team began to shift. Small steps, careful spacing, trying to find any contour that wasn't flat. The first burst of machine gun fire hit like a trapdoor opening under their feet. Snow exploded in a jagged line 10 meters ahead of Haskins, white powder punching upward with each impact. The sound was sharp and close, not distant. Someone had waited until they were committed, then cut loose. "Down!" Ward barked. They dropped into a shallow depression. Barely a dip, barely cover, but it was something. Rifles came up. The designated marksman, Klein, tried to spot the muzzle flash through glare. More bursts. Controlled. Short. Not wild. The enemy wasn't spraying. They were stitching the basin's edge, forcing the team to stay pinned. Ward's mind drew geometry in an instant. Ridges on both sides. Outpost in front. Open snow behind. They were in a kill box, the kind you didn't walk into unless you were blind or rushed, or unless someone herded you. Haskins shifted to get a better angle. A single shot cracked from the ridge. Haskins jerked hard, then collapsed sideways. "Hit!" Klein shouted. Blood began to seep through Haskins's pant leg, dark and shocking against the white. The round had taken him low, probably through the thigh. The kind of hit that didn't kill fast but stole time and heat and strength with every heartbeat. The medic, Torres, started to move. A base snapped down immediately, chewing the snow in front of him and forcing him flat. "No lane." Torres hissed, face pressed into the cold. Ward's jaw clenched. He risked a glance over the lip of the depression. He caught a flicker of movement near the fence, figures spaced out, using posts as landmarks, not cover. A second element. They weren't just firing. They were closing, not rushing, not charging, shaping the fight like a net tightening. Ward tried hand signals, 2 fingers, a chop, a sweep, trying to communicate to the re-element to watch their flank. But the wind was a living thing, whipping snow and glare between them. Distance distorted meaning. The rear man stayed back, uncertain. Coordination fractured. Ward could feel it slipping, the way a rope starts to fray before it snaps. Then, silence snapped into violence in a different register. One clean crack, impossibly sharp, rang out from somewhere far and high. It wasn't the stuttering chatter of the machine gun. It was a single, deliberate punctuation mark. Ward saw it happen. The gunner on the left ridge was mid-burst, his weapon kicking. The next instant he folded as if his strings had been cut. The machine gun sagged. The barrel dipped. The weapon slid down the slope like a discarded tool, leaving a faint trail in the snow. Ward blinked once, not believing. No one on his team had climbed high enough to shoot that ridge. No one had that angle. They'd approached fast. They'd stayed low. The outpost was supposed to be empty. The enemy's fire stuttered, not stopped, but hesitated, like a man in mid-sentence forgetting his next word. That half-second of confusion was a gift in a place where seconds were currency. Move! Micro! Ward snapped. He grabbed the collar of the rear rifleman and yanked him 2 meters left into a slightly deeper pocket. He dragged the radio operator with him. They scraped snow with elbows and forearms, trying to build a lip. Another crack. Cleaner somehow, like the air itself had been sliced. A figure near the fence, one of the enemy's radio carriers, jerked backward and collapsed. The man's pack thudded into the snow. At the same moment, Ward's radio made a faint, ragged whisper, like a chokehold loosening for breath. Ward's eyes swung upward, scanning ridges, rocks, shadows. Nothing. No glint. No silhouette. No movement. Only the wind, the hard sun, and the sudden, terrifying realization. Someone was out there, hunting the hunters, and they couldn't see her. The quiet operator at the empty outpost. Dawn had been quieter than the firefight. The sky was a pale bruise over the mountains, the kind of cold morning that made metal sting and made every sound travel too far. The team stood around a map laid over a crate, faces half hidden under scarves and helmet straps, hands tucked into gloves. The briefing had been simple on paper. Verify the outpost is abandoned. Recover a sensor data module. Mark the structure for demolition later. Command's tone had been casual, almost bored, like they were assigning trash pickup. It's a dead relay site, the lieutenant had said. Old border surveillance node. Wasn't worth keeping manned. You go in, confirm, grab the module, get out. Extraction at 14:30. Weather moves in after that. Ward had noticed the map note, though. A faded symbol near the outpost. A thin line that once connected it to a chain of sensors like beads on a wire. Small site, big reach. The kind of reach someone might still care about. The unit was balanced. Ward leading. The radio operator. Torres the medic. 2 riflemen. And Klein the marksman. Solid. Then the last-minute add-on had arrived. She didn't stride in. She didn't announce herself. She simply stepped into the circle as if she'd been there all along. A figure in white camouflage over layers, rifle case slung, face mostly hidden behind a scarf and goggles. Ward checked his roster. You're the attached specialist. She nodded once. A small motion. What's your name? One of the riflemen asked. Not hostile, just curious. She gave it, quietly, then let the sound fade into the cold. After that, she didn't talk unless spoken to, and even then she used the fewest words that did the job. The others looked at her and saw support. Paperwork in boots. Someone assigned because a box needed checking. They didn't see how she watched. While Ward and the lieutenant discussed timing, she turned her face into the wind and lifted a gloved hand, feeling the gusts as if reading Braille. She crouched, pressed her knuckle into the snow crust, and listened to the crackle it made. Hard pack, thin powder on top. She glanced up at the ridgeline and noted how the sun sat low enough to throw long shadows, but high enough to burn glare off any exposed glass. She checked her gear like it was ritual, not habit. Magazines counted, not assumed. Backup battery tested and tucked close to warmth. Optics kept covered against glare and frost. A strip of cloth ready to wipe lenses without scratching. Nothing flashy. Nothing loud. just a quiet refusal to be surprised. Before step-off, the radios worked perfectly. Clear, clean, immediate. The radio operator smiled a little. She didn't. She watched the radio's display, then the horizon, then back again, as if connecting dots no one else had noticed. Comms work now, she thought, which means someone can choose when they don't. The route was the fastest line, straight across the basin, shallow approach to the fence, quick entry to the building. It was exposed but efficient. Command wanted speed. The extraction window was tight. She asked for a high overwatch pause at the last ridge before the basin. Just 2 minutes to scan. Ward considered it. The lieutenant's voice echoed in his head. Keep tempo. Don't miss the window. Negative, Ward said finally. We keep moving. Stay with the element. Observe as we go. She didn't argue. She simply nodded and fell in. But when they reached a bend where the terrain folded and sight lines shifted, she slowed by a fraction. Not enough to be obvious. She let the others move ahead, then stepped off the main track and began climbing toward the ridgeline, using a shallow cut in the snow to hide her silhouette. No radio, no call-out, just intent. From higher ground, the outpost looked different. The fence line wasn't just old wire. It was a boundary someone had recently respected. The snow near it had been disturbed, then smoothed. A dead door had a faint scuff mark at the bottom, like it had been opened and closed repeatedly. A thin cable run, newer than the rust around it, snaked from the building to a spot of slightly raised snow that didn't match the surrounding drifts. She lay still and watched for a long moment. A pattern emerged. The basin was a trigger line. Once the unit crossed it, the ridges could pin them. The outpost could serve as bait and anchor. That cable could feed power to something buried, something that would kill their radios at the perfect moment. Someone wasn't waiting for equipment. Someone was waiting for bodies. She could have called Ward back, could have tried to force a pause. But she'd seen what happened when people were told to slow down. Egos flared, tempo was defended, and warnings turned into debate. There wasn't time for debate. So she did what she'd learned to do when the plan was wrong and the clock didn't care. She became the plan. And when the trap snapped shut, she was already climbing into the kind of position that felt impossible, because it was the only way to make survival possible. The basin becomes a box. Back in the Depression, the world had narrowed to inches. Ward pressed his cheek into the snow, feeling the sting of cold through fabric. Gunfire chopped the air above them, each base shaving off more of their safety. The enemy was smart, never firing long enough to overheat, never staying in one place long enough to be easy. They were shaping movement, not just killing. The radio operator tried again. Changed channels. Lower power. Short range. Every attempt was swallowed by interference that sounded like a living thing, a roar that filled the airwaves and left nothing for words. Torres's eyes flicked to Haskins's leg. Blood was soaking into snow, turning it into slush. Haskins's face had gone pale beneath grime and frost. I need to move, Torres whispered. You move, you die, Klein muttered, scanning ridges. Ward peeked over the lip again and caught a ridge observer. Binoculars, calm posture, calling shots by hand signals. He saw an RPG team sliding along a flanking knob, weapon tube carried low. He saw someone else, an enemy leader type, directing the fire pattern with quick, clipped gestures. These weren't amateurs. This was planned. The outpost wasn't empty either. Behind the cracked window, a shadow moved. A shape leaned close, then vanished. Someone inside, guarding something, or watching. The enemy's quiet close began. One element moving downhill, using fence posts like stepping stones, taking their time. They weren't rushing for a quick finish. They were closing the net. Ward's team returned fire in short bursts, controlled, but too frequent. Ammo began to disappear in a way that felt like sand slipping through fingers. The bright snow turned their muzzle flashes into beacons. Every shot they fired told the enemy exactly where to aim. Visibility shifted in pulses as wind kicked up ground snow. For a second, everything became a white veil. Then it cleared again, revealing the same brutal openness. Ward checked his watch. A small movement, but it carried weight. Extraction was a narrow slot in the afternoon. Miss it, and they'd be stuck overnight in open snow with wounded, low ammo, and an enemy that clearly knew the terrain better than they did. Up on the ridge, unseen, the sniper felt her own clock ticking. Her bolt was stiff with cold, the metal reluctant to cycle smoothly. Her spotter tool, the one that gave her quick ranging and wind reads, flickered. Battery low. The cold was eating it from the inside. She watched the ridge observer through her scope. Saw the man lift binoculars, saw him point, saw him become the spine of the enemy's targeting. She waited for a gust, for the moment the air thickened with drifting powder. Then she fired. The first round went where she wanted it, almost. The wind shifted at the last instant, tugging the bullet's path just enough that it struck a fraction off. She didn't panic. She didn't care. She corrected. A second shot followed, precise as a scalpel. The observer collapsed, binoculars dropping into snow. Down below, enemy fire faltered again, not in volume, but in coordination. Like an orchestra missing its conductor, the enemy adapted quickly. They stopped bunching, spread laterally, began scanning high points for any glint, any shadow that didn't belong. They weren't dumb enough to keep giving her the same target twice. Ward saw the shift and tried to capitalize. Smoke, he hissed. A rifleman threw a canister. It popped and began to billow gray. The wind tore it thin. The smoke became a ragged scarf, not a curtain. It drifted away, useless. Protocol failed. Improvisation became mandatory. Enemy fire pinned them again, tighter now, and Ward could feel the trap evolving. They weren't just closing. They were also reaching upward, angles changing, bursts walking higher. Someone was trying to find the unseen shooter. Ward's eyes flicked to the ridgeline. A faint shape moved there, two figures climbing, slow and deliberate, using a safer flank. Counterhunt. They were coming for whoever had fired those impossible shots. And Ward's team was still trapped in the open, still bleeding, still jammed. The box was shrinking from every side. The solo move up the knife edge. The sniper knew she couldn't win from where she was. Her first perch had saved lives, bought seconds, created hesitation. But it had also revealed a truth. The enemy would adapt until her position became a liability. They were already scanning. They were already climbing. She needed a new angle, one that looked down into the enemy's control node instead of sideways into their firing line. She needed to see the heart, not the hands. The terrain offered one answer, and it was the kind of answer that got people killed. A knife-edge ridge ran above the outpost, wind-scoured rock with snow clinging to it like a thin lie. The crest was sharp. The sides dropped steep. The traverse would force her to move in daylight, exposed to anyone watching the skyline. Unless she moved like a shadow. She studied it, not with bravado, but with calculation. She could time her movement with the gusts, use bursts of drifting snow as cover. She could stay below the crest, crawl when she had to, belly slide down hard crust where footprints wouldn't form deep. Her optic lens began to frost at the edges, tiny crystal blooms that threatened to cloud clarity. She warmed it with the heel of her hand, careful not to leave heat shimmer that a drone might catch. She checked her remaining rounds. Enough for a ladder, not enough for mistakes. A faint buzzing crept into the soundscape, small, persistent. Not a bird, not wind. The enemy had something in the air, a small drone sweeping for movement and heat. Below, the firefight continued, muffled by distance but relentless. She couldn't hear words, couldn't coordinate. She was a ghost by necessity, not preference. She went silent completely. No radio, no signal, nothing that could betray her. She crawled along rock, then slid down a hard crust in a controlled belly slide, using the wind's roar to mask any scrape. The snow stung her face even through fabric. The cold burned her fingers through gloves. Halfway through the traverse, she saw something that tightened her chest. Near the outpost, a figure moved in jerky, coerced steps, an unarmed technician in heavy winter gear, hands raised slightly, pushed by an enemy guard. The guard used the tech as a moving shield near the cable run. Her scope found the guard's chest. A shot would be easy, but easy didn't mean clean. The tech's movements were unpredictable, forced. A single stumble could put them in the bullet's path. In a fight this tight, a mistake would be permanent. She held fire, not because she was soft, because she was disciplined. She tracked the cable instead, following it to a small rise where snow had been piled in a way that didn't match the wind. A lump beneath. Something buried. A portable jammer, likely, fed by power and protected by a rotating guard. A second device sat near it. Short burst transmitter, maybe. Something meant to upload, not just disrupt. Her range tool flickered, then died. For a second, the world tried to widen into uncertainty. She refused it. She estimated distance using fence spacing and known terrain references, counting posts, measuring angles, doing the old math that didn't need batteries. Her breathing slowed. Her heartbeat became something she could feel and control. The enemy climbers were closer now, moving up the safer flank, scanning. She committed. The impossible angle required one more exposed movement, up and over a rock spur, then down onto a perch that overlooked the jammer position. It was a place that would look obvious if anyone searched for it, but only after they knew where to look. She reached it, pressed into snow and rock, and let stillness settle over her like a second camouflage. Below, Ward prepared a desperate move. Two men timing a crawl toward Haskins, waiting for the next gust like sailors waiting for a wave. They didn't know she was setting the table. They didn't know the fight was about to change. She aligned her scope on the first force multiplier target and exhaled. No miracle. A sequence. Target ladder on the ridge. She built the ladder in her mind the way a mechanic lays out tools before opening an engine. Not random. Not emotional. Not revenge. Priority. Force multipliers first, because killing influence beats killing numbers. Her eyes moved through the enemy formation, not counting bodies but identifying roles. The jammer node was the throat. The commander was the brain. The RPG team was the sledgehammer. The crew serve gunner was the hand pressing Ward into the snow. The drone handler was the eye searching for her. She waited for a gust. Wind lifted loose snow in a brief curtain. Shot one. A guard near the jammer shifted his weight, rifle angled down. The round struck with surgical certainty. He collapsed without a sound that carried. Shot two. She didn't aim for a person this time. She aimed for vulnerability, the power pack, the exposed connection point where cable met device. The bullet hit hard. A spark spat into the snow. The jammer's output stuttered, like a throat trying to swallow and failing. Down in the depression, Ward's radio hissed, brief, broken. Not full comms, not clean, but the enemy's perfect chokehold had slipped. Ward felt it instantly in the fight. Enemy bursts became less synchronized, less confidently timed. The net loosened. He didn't waste the opening. He slapped the medic's shoulder and pointed, crawl lane. Torres and a rifleman moved, flat and fast, using a gust veil as cover. They reached Haskins and dragged him into a slightly deeper pocket, hands already on tourniquet and pressure bandage. Up on the ridge, the sniper's scope tracked to the RPG team. The gunner shifted, lifting the tube toward Ward's depression. That shot would have ended the fight in one ugly moment. Shot three. The round caught the gunner mid-shoulder mount, stopping the motion like a door slammed shut. The RPG tube fell into snow. The assistant scrambled, suddenly unsure whether to run or fight. Ward saw the tube drop and felt something inside him unclench. The crew serve gunner was still the main problem. His weapon pinned Ward's men so thoroughly they couldn't lift their heads without snow erupting around their helmets. The sniper's scope moved. The gunner was smart, short bursts, shifting positions slightly between strings. Not easy. She watched him for 3 seconds. Not long, but enough to map his rhythm. Shot four. The first round struck close, a correction. The gunner jerked, startled, adjusting instinctively. Shot five. The second round landed true. The machine gun fell silent, its last burst trailing off into nothing. That silence was louder than any explosion. Ward didn't hesitate. "Move up," he shouted, voice carrying because there was no longer a wall of gunfire to drown it. 2 men hauled Haskins by webbing and shoulders, dragging him across snow toward a berm closer to the outpost wall. Torres stayed tight, hands working fast despite cold. The radio operator kept trying to raise anyone, anyone, between bursts. The enemy realized what was happening. They weren't being shot at. They were being dismantled. The counterhunt accelerated. Two climbers rushed the ridge line faster now, abandoning stealth for speed. The drone's buzz grew louder, sweeping, searching for heat, for movement, for the tiny betrayals living bodies can't help making. The sniper didn't relocate yards. She relocated inches. A shift of elbow, a slight roll, a new angle through the same rock gap. Enough to break pattern without losing sight. She refused to panic shoot. Panic was how you miss and die. Her scope found the enemy commander. He wasn't wearing anything special. No bright insignia. No dramatic stunts. He was identified by behavior. The way others looked to him before moving, the way his hand signals carried authority, the way he stayed just behind the front line to see without being seen. He pointed toward the ridge. He was directing the hunt. The fight would not end until that brain stopped moving. Wind gust. Snow veil. Turning point shot. The round struck with a finality that looked almost unreal. The commander folded and fell into the snow, his arm half raised as if still trying to signal a future that no longer existed. The enemy's cohesion broke like ice under weight. For a breath, they hesitated, some dropping to cover, some firing blindly, some looking around as if the world had suddenly stopped making sense. Then desperation arrived. A heavier weapon began to thump somewhere behind the outpost. Mortar-like impacts bracketing the ridge area, snow erupting in columns, concussions punching through the air. The enemy couldn't find her, so they tried to erase the ridge itself. The sniper's mind ran the calculation in a heartbeat. Stay for one more shot and risk getting buried. Or move now and keep the advantage alive. She chose the razor compromise. Her scope snapped to the drone handler, another role identified by behavior, by the way the buzzing device reacted to his hand movements and his focus. One last shot. The handler dropped. The drone wobbled, then drifted off its search pattern, suddenly blind. The next mortar impact landed closer. Rock and snow slammed into her position. The world became vibration. She didn't wait for luck. She slid down the backside of the ridge, using gravity and controlled movement, disappearing into terrain the enemy's eyes couldn't easily own. Below, Ward's team reached the outpost wall. Ward chose a side door, less obvious than the front. They stacked as best they could with one wounded, one medic busy, and comms still ragged. He kicked the door. It flew open into cold darkness. They cleared fast, rooms small, furniture overturned, signs of recent occupation. They found the data module in a metal case, cables still warm as if recently connected. They found the technician, hands zip-tied, face pale, eyes wide with shock and relief. The tech tried to speak. Words stumbled out in a rush. They were going to upload it, the tech said. They said they wanted proof. They wanted a recording. They wanted. Ward didn't need the rest to understand. Enemy motive sharpened into clarity. Blind a region. Steal surveillance routing keys and movement logs. Stage a propaganda ambush victory. Capture the wipeout on video. Trade the data upward. And prove they could hit and vanish. This outpost wasn't dead. It was bait. Ward looked at his watch again. Extraction window was closing. He grabbed the module case, signaled his team, and started the fighting withdrawal toward the pickup zone, using the outpost wall as temporary cover. The enemy, leaderless and damaged, attempted one last flank. Ward's team met it with coordinated fire, imperfect, strained, but now purposeful. And far above, from a place no one could see, one last distant crack ended the pursuit, dropping a man who was about to crest a rise and bring fire onto their retreat. Ward didn't know who had fired it, but he felt the battlefield tilt. Not into victory, into survival. Debrief in the cold light. The extraction came in hard daylight, rotors beating the air into a frenzy. Snow rose in white halos, swirling around boots and gear and faces as the team rushed the wounded aboard first. Ward kept his rifle up, scanning ridges for the last breath of the enemy. Torres clung to Haskins's harness, eyes narrowed against rotor wash, hands still stained dark even after wiping them on snow. The helicopter's interior was loud, cramped, alive. Outside, the snowfield remained brutally calm. Ward counted heads twice, then cursed. "Where's our attached?" he shouted over the roar, though the word attached sounded wrong now. They waited 10 seconds that felt like a minute. Then she appeared. Not from the outpost, from the ridge line behind them, slipping into view like she'd stepped out of the wind itself. Rifle slung. Face calm. White camouflage scuffed with rock dust and snow. She moved with the same quiet economy she'd shown at dawn, as if she had never been absent. But Ward caught something most people would miss. Her hands. They were shaking, just slightly, just enough to betray what her face refused to show. The tremor stopped the moment she gripped the aircraft's frame, as if contact with metal anchored her. Ward stared at her, and the pieces finally locked together. The ghost shots, the ridge kills, the stuttering jammer, the sudden collapses of enemy momentum. Not luck, a deliberate dismantling of control. They lifted off, the outpost shrinking below like a dark stain on white. Later, in a makeshift debrief area, maps on a crate, breath steaming in the cold, Ward stood across from her and didn't treat her like paperwork anymore. He treated her like the reason his team was breathing. She walked them through it with clipped clarity, kill zone geometry, why the basin was a box, why the ridges mattered, how the cable run fed a buried jammer and a short burst transmitter. She explained the target ladder without bragging, as if she were discussing weather. The jammer was the throat, she said. You can't fight blind and deaf in open snow. You cut the throat first. The tech confirmed the rest, voice still shaky. They forced me to connect it. The cable was new. They were waiting for you to cross the line of sight. Someone inside watched you come in. Then they flipped the jammer. They said they'd upload the module once you were dead. They had cameras. Ward's stomach turned at that. Not just murder, performance. He looked back at her. Why didn't you tell us you were moving to Overwatch? She didn't answer right away. Her gaze drifted to the floor, to a point only she could see. Finally, she said, if I'd argued, we'd still be on that ridge. Talking. And then the line would have been crossed anyway. It wasn't arrogance. It was the blunt logic of someone who'd learned what hesitation costs. Ward nodded once. You saved us. She didn't accept the praise like a medal. She absorbed it like weight. For a moment, the room felt too quiet. Then Ward asked the question that had been sitting behind everything. They said you were experienced. Her jaw tightened, just slightly. The story behind the legend wasn't dramatic in how she told it. No hero speech. No swelling music. A past operation. A shot taken under pressure. Lives saved because she held steady when others couldn't. And someone else, someone close, lost anyway. Not because of her aim, but because Ward doesn't care how perfect you are. I made the shot, she said, voice low, and I still didn't save everyone. The words hung in the cold air like frost. Torres, hands still red raw from cold and work, looked at her differently, less like a stranger, more like someone who understood a kind of fear that never shows on the outside. Ward felt the respect settle through the team. Not loud, not performative. Earned. And then she addressed the moment that had defined the fight for her. The tech, she said. They used him as a shield. I had a shot early. I didn't take it. Ward nodded. Because you couldn't guarantee it. Because it wasn't worth killing the wrong person to prove I can shoot, she corrected gently. That was the final reversal, the one that mattered more than any bullet. Competence wasn't just accuracy. It was restraint. Outside, the mountains held their silence. The outpost, far behind now, sat in the cold light, marked, waiting, truly empty at last. As the helicopter carried them away, Ward looked at the snowfields and understood something he hadn't before. In the brightest daylight, the deadliest rescue can come from the quietest shadow.